met. Yeah, if any of you would like some classified space, you could talk to me later, by the way. I wasn't very good. I didn't sell any ads. I was a college intern. It was 1979. And that's where I met Ken, and he started Ad Week with some other fellows, and honestly, I think MediaPost is version 2, but that's another panel discussion. So really, I'd like to invite the panelists to come to stage, but before I do that, because Kim reminded us of some basic manners and etiquette, I'd like to start off by thanking her, because those are great reminders, and my mom said I should, you know, take my elbows off the table and thank people for doing great things, so thank you. But I'd actually like you to continue doing great things. I'd like you to come back and take a seat next to me, and I'll invite the rest of the panelists, and we'll start by reacting a little bit to some of your reminders, some of your points. So let me invite the rest of our panel to the stage. So I'd like to have Laura Krajacki, who is the Chief Consumer Officer of Starcom Media Vest Group. Kim, if you could sit here. Wait. Oh, we do? Okay. All right. Rob knows better than me. I was not a seating guy in the old Ad Week days. And then we have Scott Neslin, who's president of Moxie. And we have Sarah Power, who's Executive Vice President, Director of Insight and Strategy at Initiative. I'll take that one, okay. All right, well, first, just a little quick preamble, and then I'd like to get some reactions to Kim's presentation. Well, one is like, you know, why this whole hyper-connected theme, which is running throughout the whole OMMA conference. And what happens is when we start conference planning, we try and look at what are the big overarching themes that are, you know, driving the industry, shaking things up. And when you come right down to them, they're just really basic metaphors and archetypes for change. But I do think something different has happened in the last few years, really in the last year, with the ability of technology to connect people, and not just people, but all the machines that people use in a new dynamic way. And I really started seeing it with Matt's business, Picteller's old business, and some of the other companies that created these smart ads that were literally repopulating their content on the fly, you know, simple banner ads, as people's data was flowing into them. And I thought that was amazing that ads were now smart. That's a whole nother panel discussion, but the point is that there's so much dynamic technology change that's driving the change in how people interact with media and with brands, that we thought this hyper-connected thing was a game changer and it needed to be explored. So we heard yesterday a little bit from some of the people from the consumer end, you know, Jimmy Wales from Wikipedia, and you know, Fred Wilson talking about the technology companies that were driving this. And today we're really here to talk about how the practitioners are gleaning and learning that insight. And actually what I learned from listening to Kim's opening was it's still really about the consumer in the end. And all those manners that you spoke about are really things that the brands and the marketers need to be respectful of and mindful of when they talk to the consumer. So really, it's kind of 101. It's back to the old days of Emily Post. But I'd like to open up and get some reactions from the panel if things are really back to basics, or you know, are there some new? I was thinking of the new rules from Bill Maher, and these were kind of the old rules, really. But are these the new rules, the old rules? That's what I'd like to start off with. It's always fun to critique what a client just presented.
I can jump in.
Laura.
I think I really sparked to what you were talking about in terms of moving to reach and relationship. And if we really think about where the world is today and the opportunity, it is about fundamental relationships with people. Not just consumers, not just one side of who we are, of buying machines. I think marketers thinking that you can just keep growing your business by getting people to just keep buying stuff, that is part of one era. But really what it is it's about expanding and deepening that relationship with people who love your brands, who buy into the community and the service you offer. And what that really harkens on is that we've moved from a media channel reality of all that fragmentation. We all heard those headlines for the last 10 years, to a reality of sort of an experience age, which is that it's fundamentally about building relationships that matter with people. And that's the essence. Go way back, hearken to the origins of marketing and the original markets. It was about having something to trade on that people valued, and that the relationship that you establish continually over time. So I really sparked to the whole evolution pivoting on people and that fundamental, basic, elemental human relationship that it takes to have a marketing relationship today.
Ladies first.
I agree. There's not much more to say about that. I think that what's changed clearly is technology and figuring out how to take such a basic belief and address it with the different technologies that people are using, because it's a lot more than just two people having a conversation now in this day and age, and it's understanding how to fulfill those basic beliefs with technology that is smarter than we are in a lot of different ways. So.
Yeah, Sarah, I would agree with that because, Joe, to your point earlier, what are some of the big changes we've seen in the last year? I think it's media strategists working closer with technology strategists, where before, and I still agree with this, it's the combination of media and creative that makes a big difference. But I think now we're seeing a third part to the relationship internally at agencies that's really driving consumer engagement, creativity, and new ideas that haven't been there before. So I would put technology strategist as a key agency component that is greater today than it was 2 years ago in a media planning relationship.
Yeah, I really want to follow up on that, but I want to save that for later. But if I forget, remind me, because I think it's really important. I think technology changes relationships and changes sets of manners because it happens so fast. It's important. By the way, we're going to leave room for questions from the audience in a little while. But I wanted to come back to this notion of, these basic manners and things. It's a little ironic when you think about it, because I'm a big fan of Mad Men, and if you go back and you watch their form of courtship and manners, it actually, it's a Hollywood version, but it's really not that polite as we might remember. But more importantly, we come out of an era where marketers really probably didn't really respect the consumer. I mean, they started out, they were masses, they were targets. It was all about those money words. It really wasn't about the relationships. And I love the way you framed it, that it's reach and relationship now. So it's not reach and frequency, it's about those connections. And I love your title, Chief Consumer Officer at a media agency. It's a great title. So what I really want to ask you is, with that in mind, has Madison Avenue finally grown up to respect the consumer? And is it really about, would you call it the UX, user experience of media planning? Is that where media planning is going? How the end user is experiencing it, which is a completely different paradigm shift from where we came from, 50 years ago, 20 years ago.
I could jump in on that. I think it's not just an agency issue. Well, I worked on the agency side for many, many years, and we have great agency partners now that I'm on the client side. And we all need to own the shift. So agencies are incentivized and paid by their clients to accomplish certain things. And we as clients pay for the behavior that we want. So if we're going to move from commodity-based marketing or media to something very different that looks like relationships and relationship building, that's a different type of service, and we all need to kind of lock arms together and decide what that looks like. But I do think that we need to make a shift more toward that than we have so far.
So, one of the things that we spoke about yesterday that I found fascinating was how the consumer is changing while we're trying to change our practices for understanding them. And there's a theory that technology is starting to hyper-accelerate them, change how they behave, who they are. We have the next issue of Media Magazine coming out in about a week, and it really explores this theme. The guest editor is Brian Monahan from Interpublic, and we explored this theme of how human beings are actually evolving because of media technologies. And Faith Popcorn on the panel yesterday spoke about that a little bit. She kept saying our DNA is actually changing because of media technology, that, people, especially young kids, just interact with media differently. And I'd really like to hear from you guys if you feel that's true, and how the way you plan, think about the consumer, think about creating media environments for those consumers are changing as a result of people changing.
I think one thing I would say is, people leave breadcrumbs like birds in terms of how to behave. They're telling us what to do as marketers when you watch their behavior. So if you look at how consumers, and again, people are involved, they converse openly. They will share their raves and their rage with brands immediately, which is exactly what you were speaking about we must have that adaptive ability as marketers to truly listen and sense and respond meaningfully in the moment. And if you really watch people elementally, it is about having something to trade on. So what do you show up at the party with? What's your currency that you trade on? What do you offer people in any relationship? What is the natural conversation you have? And how do you speak like a natural human being versus just, target this, 50% off more of that? They know all of that. The content, which is our lives. People, it's just how we move through content. The industry makes content seem like it's some big fancy thing, you need fancy producers. Yes, you do. But content is also the stories that are our lives that we share naturally. And they're doing it. Look at YouTube. And the whole fact that YouTube is dynamic culture on display daily and globally. And ultimately, people from the oldest days to now have always formed communities. And that communities, they share, they converse, they trade, they connect. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do as a brand, is to understand who your loyal community is and how to connect into other ones and grow that community. So I feel like when you really look at human behavior and how we're behaving today, some of it's very elemental. And exactly as you said, Sarah, we've got technology. It looks fancy and new, but it's actually very, very elemental. But we get to live as marketers, I think, in the most creative, dynamic age to be a marketer, because we have all these fabulous canvases to connect on, but we can't forget the fundamental humanity of how to behave and how to build meaningful relationships.
So, if I got you right, it's still about the fundamentals of human beings, and you don't really think humans are changing in terms of how they behave and interact with media?
No, I think the canvases they're using changes. But
Yeah, no, I don't think that that's what Laura said. I think that fundamentally humans still have the same basic needs. The way that we go about getting those and communicating that to people has completely changed because of technology, but fundamentally, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're still fundamentally have the same needs. We just have a lot more options to tell people that.
Yeah, we've always known as marketers, this has been true ever since I was in the business, that word of mouth is one of the most influential ways to stimulate a brand, feeling, sales, whatever you're measuring on the spectrum. Social marketing now is just another way to stimulate that.
And scale it.
Right, and that is, to your point, we have always had that basic in our business, but now we have new technologies. I think we have some new creativity to actually bring that to a higher level for advertisers.
I think the watch out that I would add on behavior and technology comes from my own house. The difference between my 22-year-old and my 17-year-old, the way they work with technology is like night and day. They are different people with their technology. They're really tech savvy, but really different. And my older one uses the laptop and gets all the utility. My little one, it's like part of her body. It's a different interaction. So, as marketers, as we age up, and we're digital immigrants, not natives, we're really going to have to study hard to understand what this new generation and how they tick, because it's really different.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kim. Which is the premise of this next issue, which is really what I'm trying to get at in this question, which is, have people really change fundamentally, and does media planning, comms planning, strategic planning need to change as a result of that? One thing I did sense from looking at your presentation, and it's something we all know, is word of mouth always mattered, but consumers didn't have the power and influence to activate their mouths the way they do now. And we saw that with a lot of the campaigns that Kim ran through. And I want to ask you if that's changed the way you plan strategies. that the fact that a consumer can have as, there's a line I like to use, which is listen carefully to this sentence, because by the time I finish saying it, a new media platform will have been created. And that's a Facebook page, a blog, a Twitter account. They have just as much power as Kim does, and all you guys have with all your media spending. So my question is, sorry to be combative, I hate that. I'm trying to get at this, because here's the thing, I'm not a practitioner, I'm a journalist who covers you guys. I'm trying to understand how the practice has changed. It's changing, right? We're in the throes of a change. I really want to understand how this change in consumer behavior that we're talking about now is affecting the way you develop strategies for your clients, or as a client is changing her strategy.
I mean, I'll take the first stab at that. I think one of the best tools and practices that has changed has been the incorporation of social listening into the development of not just simply media strategies, but messaging strategies as well. And before, those practices used to take the form in traditional things like focus groups, maybe even online surveys that had not just simply lag times, but maybe lacked the real feelings or sentiment from consumers. And so now you see that happening much earlier in the process. It's also ongoing after a campaign has launched, to then tweak a campaign again, both from a media strategy perspective and from a messaging perspective. And that is something that we were not doing as well before.
No, I completely agree. Like what's pivoting is you're moving from the planning and buying of static things where you plan out, a year ahead, to now it's about 365 days, 24/7 you are planning, which is because of this technology you can listen, you can understand the sentiment, and you can sense and respond dynamically. So to me, planning and buying, that gets smushed, really, like it gets collapsed from a standpoint of truly understanding what do they like, what do they not. You can picture a dashboard. What are you dialing up and what are you dialing down? And that means that you've got to be moving from a state of media planning or creative planning, messaging, where you have all this time to sit in an ivory tower, pontificate, and to create a concept, versus really dynamically understanding people all the time, period. Like your greatest competitive advantage in this reality is understanding people and your audience and having the capabilities to be in touch with them real time, and then planning 24/7. It's not annual.
And I think it's also understanding beyond social and beyond, watching YouTube and Facebook likes, it's understanding how they interact with every single asset you have at your disposal. So whether that's the brand website, whether it's literature that you have, and so it's because different consumers respond to different stimulus in different ways. So yes, social has a big impact, but it's really understanding how your paid media impacts your earned media, and then owned, because that's something that you can control, and really making sure that you're controlling what you can control to set the stage for yourself for success.
So among other things, there's a better return path now with social media, because you're hearing and listening and you can activate it. One of the interesting things about digital media in general is that it created return paths that we could use to target and respond to consumers, but they had largely been automated up until now. And I think what you guys are saying is now you have better conversations going on with the consumer. So tell me, how much of it is art and science, art versus science? How much of it is human beings versus algorithms? Like, get a little into that. How much is strategic planning now, setting up the proper technology to listen and react versus listening and reacting?
I still think it's a 50-50 business. You can have all the technology and exchanges in the world, and it gets you only so far. Where I've noticed at our agency that we're adding a lot of value to clients is in our community management teams that are doing the listening, they're doing the reacting to the blogs and the Facebook pages, and recommending to clients what the strategy should be from there. And they have tools certainly at their disposal to make those recommendations, but it's also them being familiar with the client's business, the client's brands, the consumers that they're talking to, and making recommendations that is really from a human standpoint, not simply from a number standpoint.
It's like any focus group that you go to. If you were to take what you heard online and activate against that, it would be like going to a focus group and only listening to the loudest person in there. I think there has to be a blend of art and science, because you have a lot of consumers who aren't necessarily out there shouting the loudest, and you need to serve them as well. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's actually one of my big concerns, especially with the rise of social media now, as I've been covering it, is that a lot of people think you can get all your answers from it. in the next issue of Media, we have this interview with Stefan Weitz from Microsoft, who runs Bing. And I asked him this question about whether things that don't exist on Google or Bing don't exist to the average person now because they're not accessible. And they have this notion of the dark web, right, that they use, which is the amount of information that's out there that is not, tagged and indexed. And it's considerable. It's like 90% of all the information in the world by their counts. And it just makes me realize that we can only ever know so much about what's out there and what's going on in the consumers' heads. So my question is, how much do you weight the value of this information, of those loudest voices, versus not? How do you know what's the right mix of weight to put on that?
I think it varies on what you're trying to do with the data. I mean, there's different uses. So if you have a hypothesis or intuition that you want to validate, that's one way to use a lot of information out there. If you want to try to find ideas about things that people want or need that maybe you wouldn't have thought of without looking outside of your office, right? That's another way. I think a lot of times, I realize that you can never know it all. And I think you have to choose your spots where you're really digging into data and be consistent about it so that you can benchmark success. So if every time you do something new, you measure it differently, it's very hard to scale. So when we look at data, we're trying to find ways to A, simplify, B, get real smart fast, but also once we've either succeeded or failed, move on or scale. So those are the ways that we use data. And in many, I get a lot of calls from a lot of research companies. There's a million ways to slice this up, and simplifying it and using it consistently would be powerful.
All right, I'm going to stick on this one just for a minute because you're the best human beings in the world right now to understand what other human beings think about brands as they relate to media. So one of the other things we looked at was how fast technology is changing in terms of intelligence, and AI is really accelerating quickly, and there's a theory that machines can actually become smarter than people pretty soon. Do you think at some point, we've already, for 10 or 15 years, we've automated the way network TV buys. There's just too many network TV variables or options to put into a plan, so now there are optimizers. We started that 15 years ago. Now, so much of the technology that's driving media planning is done through, calibrations and automations and things. My question is, could we get to the point where technology could actually target consumers better than human beings can?
Well, I'll take that from the beginning. I think we're sort of at that point because with the exchanges, the demand-side platforms, many clients have data management platforms. That's happening already. But again, I'll come back to my point. I think it's still a 50-50 business where I believe the magic really happens in our business is when you have partnership either with a media owner, the creative and media specialist coming together, the client, the technology specialist. That human side of the business, I think, is still what makes the big impact. And we're at a point already where technology can target, they can retarget. We're at that point. But when you look at partnerships that we've done with clients and Google or Facebook or anybody else, that's when I think you get a much more powerful engagement platform for a client and their brands.
I agree. I feel like we're focusing too much on the channels, and I feel like that was the last decade. The channels are there. They're going to be there. And as you said, by the time we're done with this panel, there's going to be 2 more new channels created or canvases to connect on. And yes, technology can keep automating that and making it more efficient and all those things. But at the end of the day, what do you want to do? What's meaningful for your brand to step forward and trade on beyond its physical product necessarily? And that, to me, is where you pivot first. So that is that sort of art and science. Yes, the science part can keep efficiently, once you've decided and made a decision of where to go and how to connect, which to me is the strategy is around experience planning. What is the experience you want people to have with Listerine or with Nike Plus or Coca-Cola? You step back from that standpoint and you understand that art part, and that's branding fundamentals. And to me, when you understand that, then yes, the data and the algorithms, that can go out to the channel. But I hope, and I think it would be very fresh as an industry to move from all this fascination with the shiny objects of the canvases. And I know maybe that sounds, we're a media industry, so we love the canvases and we love technology, but that's going to just be, an ocean of opportunity. Where you pivot, and what's really fascinating is, what do people need, want, value, and don't? To me, and actually people miss that a lot of times, of what don't they want, and then program the machines. They'll buy it better, faster than we ever will. But we can't lose our own human intuition, our own human creativity to know how to approach these relationships. So go back to the elementals of human relationships and design around that consumer, and then let the machines and the science take over how we optimize that part. But you can put more attention and more brain power within your agencies and client teams on the design of meaningful experiences and figuring out what really matters.
Joe, I know you wanted to, sorry, go on another question, but to build off that a little bit, I think one of the greatest things that's happened in the last year has been advertisers' willingness to take risk with their brands in the marketplace from a social marketing perspective. 2 years ago, I will tell you, it was sometimes very difficult to talk to a client about doing a social media campaign or getting consumers to respond to a brand program or lose that control. That was a difficult conversation. It was actually hard to get a green light for that. I think we're in a much better place today. Kim, the examples you showed were fantastic. And I think it shows how far the industry has really come in this area in the last, I would say, 18 months.
But isn't that a part of the fact that social media is just a bigger deal in society now? And Mark Zuckerberg's on the cover of Time, and Kim's 17-year-old is all over Facebook, and so that's inevitable. But here's the question I really want to ask you, because I think Laura, what you were getting at is a really important question, which is, for years we talked about media neutrality. Our agencies and clients thinking, objectively about the media they use, or do they have biases for network TV for whatever reasons. I think this new notion of technology neutrality has come up in the last year or so that I've been hearing. And it's the same concept, which is, how much do you get behind this technology that's giving you easy answers that you're comfortable using? So let me ask you all, this is a tough one, but I'd like to you all to say, where do you think there are some imbalances now? How much are we artificially, emphasizing or putting weight on technologies or platforms, like maybe social media, because we get it now, and there's a lot of momentum behind it, but in terms of the actual consumer, the people, those experiences you're trying to manage, what's out of whack now? I know it's a tough question, but
I don't want to say I'm anti-technology at all. So technology is fascinating. To me, that is what's giving us that really fresh creative fuel to create against as marketers, and it unleashes those canvases to create on. All I'm saying is sort of, just because a GPS can take you and tell you to go over a cliff, you don't just follow it because the machine tells you to go over a cliff. You've got to use some of your own intuition of where you're getting, and it's a guide. So it can guide, as you're saying, different hypotheses. You're using data in different ways against different business challenges. And yes, we can then optimize how it is actually then brought to market. But what we actually do is we design experiences. And experiences need an understanding, a rich understanding of people and consumer insights dynamically, not go and spend 6 months understanding it and then come back with a big data report. That is also, I think, very passe. But how do I know from Monday to Friday what's different? So I sense and respond and tweak that on the following Monday. But by no means am I saying it's anti-technology. But to me, it's embracing all of those creative channels to create on.
I think we flooded the market with apps.
Yeah.
I think that was the cool, fun thing. Check the box. We got to have an app. And maybe you don't. I think, you have to ask tough questions. You're not always, depending on what brand you work on, you're not always going to get to build an app. I do think there's a tendency to do that. We have examples where we have Facebook campaigns, and the metric is how many likes you get. Well, what did you want them to do? I'm glad they like you, but what did you want them to do? What mindset did you want to change? So I think it's deeper than that. And yeah, I do think there's sometimes an imbalance.
To quote Kim, you want them to love you, not like you. So, actually, I think we have to turn to the audience in case we have questions, because we'll run out of time if we don't. So if you do, the old technology, you got it, the hands.
Good morning. I'm Jay Shaw, and I'm a freelance consultant. But one thing I've had experience, I love the technology, the numbers, I work in data all the time, but I had an experience being out in the field, approaching a cosmetics counter and being told by the woman behind the counter, "No, dear, that's not the way it works." But I found that to be a really grounding experience when you're in the numbers, and I was just wondering if you people make an effort to actually get out in the field and walk around a mall in Omaha or someplace like that, because that really works.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, that's recreation. that's the best part of my job and the work that we get to do, which is I will never lose that, because that's where the insight lies. Again, we're people, connecting with people, and brands are the currency to do that. And there's no richer source than standing at a beauty counter or watching how someone is shopping for hair care in the aisle. Watch, they do sniff the shampoo because they're buying on scent. Absolutely. I mean, even within our organization, globally, we have strategists worldwide as a global network who are going in field, who are leveraging technology, who can be briefed from a global investigation brief to then go out in field. But again, the difference is evolving from spending 6 months to do that versus the brief goes out on Monday from global, and you've got 125 strategists researching, say, Listerine and oral care category, and they are out in Saudi Arabia and Brazil and Russia and France at the exact same moment, and it gets aggregated globally. That's dynamic, real-time, but human understanding in terms of the consumer insights in field. Would never give that up.
It's a great question. I ran into a woman about a year ago who's in the business, and I was looking over her shoulder, and she was typing into a blog. It's called My Life as a Focus Group. And she works for a pharma agency, and she writes every day about human experiences that relate to the business and her brands. She goes out in the field and conducts legit, focus group studies, and then she also works with all the technology and the data. But it is a 360-degree thing, and that was one of the things I'm trying to get at, is how much do we, and you said it's 50-50. I don't know. I'd like to see the algorithm on that, but. And any other questions?
Hi, I'm Kyle McCarthy, a publisher at Family Travel Forum, and I'm familiar with some of the Johnson & Johnson stuff you've done with Girl Up. And so one of my questions is this double bottom line kind of marketing and advertising good for your bottom line? Is it a lasting thing? Are we going to see more of it, or is it just a fad?
I didn't hear the example that you were referring to.
Girl Up?
Girl Up. Yeah, yes. Johnson & Johnson works on a lot of different platforms, from philanthropy to pure marketing. But I do believe, as I said, in my talk earlier, that generosity and reciprocity is becoming more and more important in the world, and I think that will always be a part of what we do. Absolutely, and it is a basis for our philosophy.
Hi, good morning. My name is Brandon Gerson. I'm from Mack & Gur. We're a marketing agency that specializes in social listening, and I think this is a really relevant panel, and also really appreciated the presentation, Kim, before, and kind of wanted to touch on the netiquette, and how do you guys foresee the social listening aspect and the real time affecting relationships between the agency side and the brand or the client side moving forward?
I think that brand sides need to be able to give up some trust. They have to trust their agencies and believe, the world of authorization after authorization. If we're working on real time, there are times where a brand has to kind of give up some control to the agency and take a leap of faith and believe that they're doing everything in their best interest. And so I think that, and sometimes that's difficult for the brand and agency relationship.
I agree, sir. I think where it's going is you've got to collapse those walls of formality between client and agency. If we're all going to be able to pivot on a dime and respond real time, that means there's got to be much more sharing of that intelligence quickly, again, versus we need to set up a meeting in a month and then come out and you'll share, we'll share. Like, that all just creates a drag, and at the end of the day, people are on, their life is moving on, and we're creating drag in the system based on our silos.
Some of the people that we have at our agency who work in our community management and strategy programs actually work at the client 2 to 3 days a week. They have direct dials into legal, PR, as well as the brand manager, and there is complete transparency. And I have to say that the one benefit I think of social marketing in the last 18 months has been it has really helped the agencies, I think, to get closer to clients and build a deeper relationship than there has been in the past.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a lot along the lines almost of the direct marketing model, and really a change of mindset, as you mentioned, Laura, earlier, that you're never really done. So you don't do your plan and present the plan and you're done with the plan. It's a 24/7, you're never done. And I think that, we're starting to get used to that, but being flexible and nimble is really important in this environment. And trust and transparency are huge factors in all of that. So you have to make sure that you have the people on your team. You kind of become a SWAT team together as opposed to, the monthly or quarterly meeting check-in. It's a different relationship.
I think we have room for one more question there.
Hi, Nancy Lewinter, Editorial Director, Red Cats USA. Sarah, you had mentioned that people have the same human needs, and something that has permeated both yesterday and today are references to Mad Men, and the fact that 20-somethings are as obsessed with it as my generation, which sort of was on the cusp of it. Is it that we really have very different human needs, that all this hyperconnectivity has had us get a need for that style and connection because we are feeling alienated, because we are feeling overwhelmed? Because otherwise, why are 20-somethings so identifying with this 10 minutes to pour a drinkness of it all?
I think that 20-year-olds are connecting with it and 30-year-olds because it's good quality content. And I think that fundamentally, whether it's in the movie theater in the 1920s, whether it's watching something on your phone right now, if it's good quality, good acting, it's funny, I think that that's why and I think that that's a basic need. People want to be entertained, and I think that that's why people across ages are connecting with Mad Men.
I think one of the coolest things about this 20-something generation is how much they appreciate retro.
Yeah.
They love the old music. Glee and American Idol has brought back a ton of old music, and they love these old genres. And we'll see how Pan Am does, but that's an airline I actually remember. So it's just very interesting to see them really appreciate the good old days, because I don't remember doing that so much. I guess I liked Happy Days, but it just feels like a really nice trend. It's kind of comforting.
But I agree with you. I think Matt Weiner could do a science fiction TV series, and it would be watched because he's just a great writer. And I think we're out of time, but I wanted to say that I think you guys have a really tough job because you have to work across the spectrum of the most granular metadata, that machines are throwing off to these very unique human experiences. And you have to find that middle point somewhere in between to make her cash register, her money words move, It's tough, so congratulations for moving us along. I'd like you to come back a year from now and tell us where we are and how much it has changed. So I want to thank you all, Kim, Laura, Sarah, and Scott. Thank you very much. Well, I only did that because of the etiquette of the old school 1950s. You have to go ladies first, and that's why I did that. Okay, it was subliminal.